Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Mark DiCarlo. Tonight my guest is Professor Swint Friday, and he's a professor at Texas A&M Corpus Christi, professor of economics. Is that right? No, finance, rather. Finance. How long have you been there, Professor?
I've been there 11 years now.
And how large is the university now?
We have about 10,000 students, so we keep growing.
You know, I mentioned you just briefly before the show that it's unfortunate, but it doesn't seem as if Corpus Christi has, I don't know what you want to say, the infrastructure or the glamour to keep a lot of these students that are graduating, or maybe the good jobs to keep them here.
No, we don't now, but I think hopefully in the future with some developments going on in the Eagle Ford Shale and the La Quinta Trade Terminal and the Tianjin Pipe Company coming, and there's some things on the horizon that may bring some wealth into this city that'll make it create some real possibilities for our students in the future.
So you mentioned the Eagle Ford Shale. What's the Eagle Ford Shale?
That's that formation west of us here that is full of oil and gas, which is probably one of the most valuable commodities in the world now.
Is that the what oil and gas is some of the most valuable commodities in the world?
That's pretty much what runs all our vehicles and provides the large chunk of our energy.
And is the Eagle Ford Shale, what is that? Why do they call it Eagle Ford? Do you know? Is that the name of the area?
Well, it's two different names. It's Eagle and Ford, and I don't know the origin of it, but I'm assuming that there was some combination of individuals.
I've seen it on a map, and it seems like it's a massive area.
It is a large area that covers a good chunk of South Texas, south of San Antonio.
But it's not within Nueces County.
It comes right to the edge of it looks like.
Okay.
So.
Well, that area, we've heard a lot of publicity about that, and a lot of publicity about the way I believe that oil and gas is being extracted through a process called fracking. Is that right? Is this oil and gas being extracted through fracking?
Right. Yeah. It's a technology I believe developed by the Department of Energy a number of years ago, where basically they drill down about 25,000 feet and then turn and do a horizontal drill, left to right, east to west, and go in and then under high pressure push water and some sand and different chemicals into it, and in essence blow up the formation. To release that oil and gas that's trapped inside that shale, and then they bring it all to the surface with that.
I'm kind of curious because there's a lot of when I visit my father who lives in Ohio, there's all this debate about the fact that it's going to destroy the water supply system, etc. up there. So I'll hit that in a second. But how is it? Does it bubble up to the top? Does it come up through a well? Like, they drill oil in a well and it comes out.
Right.
How does it come out?
Yeah, when it releases, it comes out in substantial quantities through that, through the pipe that the casing that they put in.
So it's a similar way that it comes out. It doesn't destroy,
And the interesting thing, the way that they release that formation, and the well produces incredible volumes for a short period of time. For about 6 to 8 months, that well produces just an unbelievable volume of oil or gas. Makes it a very profitable endeavor, and the geologists have gotten so good now they always find something as a general rule, and so there's never hardly ever a dry hole, I guess, in the deal.
So I wonder how that's discovered. Is it discovered the same way? I can't remember how they do the oil and gas. Is it X-ray technology of some sort?
Right, seismograph.
Seismograph, of course.
Technology, yeah.
And what about the debate, especially in Ohio? People are very concerned about its effects on the water table. They refer to it as. Is that not an issue? It doesn't look like there's much water down here in Texas where where the Eagle Ford Shale is.
Yeah, I think actually they go through the Carrizo there, and there is substantial amount of water in the aquifer. The aquifer is very shallow, so they drill through the aquifer and go down, another 3 miles or so past the aquifer, 4 miles past the aquifer into the ground. What they do, and these engineers, I don't know how they get it done, but in essence, they seal off the aquifer where it can't be penetrated once they drill through it. And so the idea is there, and they've drilled literally thousands of these wells, and there's been no case of of pollution that I'm aware of in a water table. There's one case in the Barnett Shale, but it wasn't clear that it was actually done by the drilling. It may have been done because someone dumped something in the well. However, I think this BP offshore incident indicates that to say that nothing will ever happen or this is completely safe is that's a stretch. I believe inevitably, you'll have an accident here and there.
Well, we talked about the. Well, let's talk about BP since you mentioned it. Even though I know an ex-secretary of mine, her husband was going down there, and he was working in some sort of capacity, testing the water, etc. Did the oil spill in the Gulf close to Louisiana, did that have an effect on our economy here that you know of?
Yeah. The one thing about the Eagle Ford is I think that the effect it had, the moratorium on the offshore drilling, and that I think pushes some producers to say, hey, let's get some more onshore activity. And so in a way that helps us because it pushes more production into the Eagle Ford, which is going to be one of the largest economic events probably in South Texas in my lifetime.
Are they still banning offshore? I understood that a lot of the people in the oil and gas industry were complaining because President Obama had banned offshore drilling, or is that right?
No, I think now the moratorium's been lifted and they're just moving forward, but I do think they're going to be a little more prudent about it, hopefully.
So how long will this Eagle Ford Shale economic benefit last? Do you have any idea?
Yeah, we're looking at least for the next decade, maybe 2 decades, create 70,000 jobs and create a lot of blue-collar jobs that pay well for families and bring a lot of wealth to Corpus Christi, San Antonio, and the little outlying towns that have really struggled financially.
So these little towns that are struggling financially, did they always struggle financially? What was their industry before?
Originally agriculture, and then some oil and gas in the early '80s, and then and then not much of anything as the.
Well, what happened to what are some of the little towns that we're referring to? Sometimes I go to little towns like I go to San Diego, Texas, in Duval County, and sometimes I go to Alice. Alice seems like it's booming now. Beeville, is that one of the little towns that we're referring to?
You can just go through there and name a group of them. Corn City, going across to little towns like Asherton, La Pryor, Carrizo Springs, Crystal City, even a little town called Catarina out in the middle of Dimmitt County. These little towns, all of a sudden, it originally looked like they may have been involved in some military disaster because they were so run down. And
as does parts of Corpus too.
Right. And now all of a sudden, new building and new activity going on. And
so these young guys, mostly guys, I guess, but so these young guys working out in the Eagle Ford Shale, I guess they don't live on site. They're going to live in these little towns.
Right. Yeah, basically, in my drives through the area, they're bringing in hundreds of little portable buildings and setting up basically temporary housing for these guys. They live there, and then when they're off, they go home to their family, and so take a lot of wealth and resources back to their family and stimulate the economy.
Are those kids going to be? Are those young guys going to be working for unionized? Are they going to be working for unions? Are they going to be working for big companies? Are there big companies associated with that Eagle Ford Shale? Are these small independent companies? Who is doing the drilling, and who are these young people involved in production going to be working for?
Most of the drilling and most of the big work's going to be done by large corporations. The big oil and gas companies, the XTOs, Chesapeake, Apache, all these guys like that, Devon Energy. However, and then the oil, all the big players in the oil marathon and people like that. But
are they American companies, or is British Petroleum going to be over there too?
I don't know. I don't know of any foreign companies, but the vast majority of American companies are going to be Texas companies. And then also, we've got a lot of small oil and gas support companies, even located here in Corpus, from everything from pressure washing equipment to clean the machinery.
Oh, there's all sorts of little anecdotal, little businesses arise and make bits, etc. Right?
Lots of little spin-off businesses, and then a friend of mine they originally had a family gas station there in Pearsall, and expanding now, building more of these little convenience stores and service stations across South Texas.
So it's mostly going to be a boom to the young guys without college degrees, et cetera.
Right.
But are there anybody from Texas A&M Corpus Christi going to benefit?
No. What we're already seeing is a number of financial advisors coming out of San Antonio and setting up businesses in Corpus to get ready for the money that's going to flow in to invest. Now the people that'll make another group of people that'll make a substantial amount of money are the mineral rights owners, the landowners that have the minerals, and a lot of that wealth will flow back into Corpus to invest.
And a lot of that land to me didn't look particularly productive or anything or worthwhile.
No, it's a
pretty desert.
It's like winning the lottery. They've won the lottery.
Well, talk about winning the lottery. When I drive over to the bridge, a couple of friends of mine have benefited from this. One friend of mine in San Antonio, he sold the water rights to these guys going to be outside. He has a ranch outside of San Antonio, and he sold the water rights, so he got a little bit of a pretty big bonus.
This fracking operation uses a huge amount of water that they have to pump into the wells to break open the formation. The one thing they are doing is they're recycling a large amount of that water. They're putting it into they pump it out. When they pump it out of the well after it's gone in, they pump it into trucks and send it to these water recycling companies that put it in centrifuges, take the chemicals out, and supposedly once it's done, the water, you can drink the water. So TCEQ inspects them.
I'm not going to be drinking.
I haven't drank it, but I've heard it's
maybe
so
they
clean
can bottle it at some of the grocery store.
I don't know. Then they take all there's some really nauseous chemicals in this fracking process, and they take that and dump it into basically a disposal well, and to get rid of the chemicals. But
well, the not noxious chemicals, I'm certain a lot of people are going to be saying, "Hey, look, you're putting all that stuff in the ground." Seems like it's kind of.
Well, they pump it way down there. It's about 25,000 feet into the.
I see.
Below the surface.
So, what's the explanation for why the people up north in Ohio and Pennsylvania are complaining so loudly, and we're not complaining?
I think the issue is there is population. The Marcellus Shale, you've got a lot higher population density. And the surface owner doesn't necessarily own the minerals underneath, and so you've got a lot of not in my backyard, and then a lot of concern. Inevitably there will be some accidents and some pollution that will occur.
Yeah, I understand that. I think that I had read and or heard a couple of times that some of the farmland in Pennsylvania is the most productive farmland in maybe the country or the world, right. So therefore I could understand the the concern.
And as a general rule, my experience has been that that though they make they carve out a pretty big area on the surface when they initially drill the well, once they're gone and they put the well in production, there's really not much left that you can even see. It's all going on below, and through each hole they go in now, they'll put 4 or 5 or 6 wells. They'll go at different depths, and they'll go different directions through that same hole. So they're penetrating the aquifer a lot less than a conventional, just a vertical hole. So it actually may be a little safer than the old traditional vertical drilling.
Is that right?
From that perspective, because for the amount of oil they're getting out, because they will use the same hole and then go several different directions.
I see that there's a. You mentioned 3 things. You mentioned as maybe being a big thing in our economic development in this area. The Eagle Ford Shale, I think you mentioned about a pipe company, the Chinese pipe company?
Right, the Tianjin Pipe Company, TJP, yeah.
What kind of pipe they making?
I think it's for it's supporting...
Is it plastic pipe?
No, it's steel.
They're making steel pipe for what? For the oil? So
yeah, the $1 billion operation. I don't know. When you drive out through South Texas, they are laying pipelines every direction you look. And now that's one thing that tears up a lot of ground. They're clearing huge right-of-ways to lay these pipelines.
What are they transporting?
They're bringing all the oil out and the gas.
I just read there was a controversy that didn't receive much media coverage. I'm kind of a conspiratorialist, so when I see something that doesn't get much media coverage, where President Obama didn't try to prevent, there's supposedly a big pipeline coming from Canada transporting oil all the way to Texas to be refined here.
Right.
Are you familiar with that one?
Right, I am. And,
I mean, you would think that they would have, wouldn't it make sense they'd have a refinery in Canada?
There. Yeah, but some of this stuff they do, but in a lot of stuff is, I really don't like seeing things shipped from long distances.
Would seem right. It would seem to be inefficient.
It seems inefficient to me, but a lot of stuff that looks like a really good make-work plan because think of all the people you put to work building that pipeline. It's what I call a make work deal. They're not necessarily that great for the economy, but they put a lot of people to work temporarily. And so I could see that as a make work plan, you know.
I doubt, though, that a corporation cares about how many people, about making work for the people.
Undoubtedly, it's going to be subsidized in some way. I would think the cost of that would just be monumental.
And where's the Chinese pipe company plant going to be?
They're setting up right over here off of our La Quinta trade terminal, and
how many jobs is that going to make?
You know, it's $1 billion plus deal. I'm not sure how many jobs that it's creating exactly, but you know, another thing is our La Quinta terminal expansion that's getting ready for to receive ships from the Panama Canal.
What's La Quinta? I don't know what that is. It sounds like a hotel chain.
Yeah,
to me.
yeah. I guess it's not, but may help the La Quinta hotel chain as we get more and more business here. But it'll increase our ability to take these large ships and service them, potentially container ships as well, and get some of that. Right now, Houston controls about 70% of that market.
So this is the port of Corpus Christi.
Mm-hmm.
Is going to be what, expanding their facility,
right?
And they're going to call it La Quinta or something.
It's already called La Quinta. Yeah.
And they're going to have the capability of bringing in the large containers that we don't currently have, or it's going to increase the Port of Corpus Christi's capability to bring in containers.
Right. It'll allow us to at some point to potentially bring in containers, and then the Panama Canal is expanding, and they'll be finished in 2014. We'll be able to take in those larger ships that'll be able to come through the canal. Now most of those ships dock in Los Angeles or Long Beach, and put their cargo on train and ship it.
I see.
Ship it east.
So because the Panama Canal is expanding, they're going to be able to bring it to like the Houston port and the port of Corpus Christi. And the Panama Canal is, let's see, where's that located in the Americas? The small port.
Between,
small point?
I guess between Colombia there and hits Colombia and the South American side, and it's
so that would be more efficient because they could bring it right through the Panama Canal here and hit maybe a more central part of the United States instead of from the West Coast.
And Corpus Christi's on the way, on the way to the.
Well,
Houston.
That would be great because you know in that LA area they have this kind of interesting area where in the consumer goods there's a little shop set up to sell the consumer goods right off the port there. We don't have anything close to that.
Well, they have the same thing in Houston. There's a huge.
Oh, they do have that area now.
Off the Bell area in China, in what we call Chinatown in Houston, they have all those imported goods from those containers. They have a whole street there, Harwin Street, that's just full of those.
It's kind of interesting because it's like true entrepreneurship, right? It's like
it
you
is
know you're buying directly.
Fundamental entrepreneurship. Yeah.
And it's
well, another advantage,
eclectic, you know.
Another advantage that Corpus has is goods brought into our port. Trucking companies really appreciate the ability to get out of town quickly and not have to go through a lot of traffic, and so we can turn around and get goods to San Antonio and places, you know, in the Northwest.
We do now until too many of them come in.
Right. Well, yeah, they may.
Until they log
well, the Port of Houston handles about 70% of all that business now, and so they're a busy port. We'd have.
But the port, let's see. Excuse me for interrupting you. I didn't think where's that port at? It's not. I didn't think
Baytown is where their main terminal.
That's not like the major part of town. But you're saying they may have to drive through Houston sometimes.
Right. It's just hard to get. There's just so much traffic to get through and everything.
There was also some publicity, and I don't know. Maybe apparently it's not as big an economic factor as what you thought these other ones were. There was some publicity about an Italian factory making plastics or something. Are you familiar with that?
Oh, here locally?
Yeah.
You know, I'm not. I haven't
okay, that got a little bit of publicity that they had brought that in.
A job's a job. That's what I say. So, any job is a job is a job. So if we can get
I don't know if it's true though.
Yeah.
There's good jobs, there's bad jobs, right?
Well, and the great thing about a lot of these jobs is they require some technical expertise. So, you know, even though they're considered blue collar, these blue collar jobs will pay well, you know, relative to most other jobs we have here.
Yeah, they pay pretty well.
And so I would, I'm pretty excited about all the Eagleford and all that stuff.
I told you based on, and I already have gotten some cases from the guys working out in the fields that,
Mhm.
you know, for me, hire me for blue, you know, for
Right, right.
DWIs and all, which is different because a lot of times they can't afford to hire their own attorney if they get in
Right.
trouble. They don't have a good job. But when they have a good job, it also indicates something that they're usually going to, they have enough sense to come hire you and you can talk to them.
Yeah. Well, the good thing about the DWI deal, I think, we've got some guys out at the university doing research on in our GIS area on the GPS stuff and you know, the global positioning, and I think in about 20 years we'll have vehicles that you can just say drive home and they'll drive you home. And so it may put a lot of the DWI business, eliminate a lot of your DWI business.
Well, I mean, you know, things boom and bust. You know, the big boom in criminal law the last 5 years or 10 years, ever since the O.J. Simpson scandal, was the domestic assault cases, where they never used to like make a big deal about those.
Right.
Now any domestic assault case is a big case,
Right.
for fear, of course, that somebody gets killed down the line.
Right.
Well, a friend of mine over there too. I go over there. I go when I drive over the bridge and I go to Sinton, perhaps to practice law. I see all these windmills, right? And this friend of mine, he has a farm, and so it's been quite a boom for him to
Right.
be able to lease his land for these windmills.
Yeah, inevitably, Corpus is, we're caught between those two very productive sources of energy, wind and the oil and gas. And so when we look at, when I've done the research I've done on it, the two excellent sources of energy, solar power, I think, it has no future in any large scale. It just seems to be too costly relative to the amount of electricity generated, and
It would seem, if anywhere it would be productive, would be in this area.
well, it's
where-
just a very short period of time that you actually get energy out of it, and so you have to put a lot of infrastructure in place to only collect energy for about 6 hours a day, whereas your wind is 24-hour potential. And,
I see.
And you can tell the big investors, T. Boone Pickens out in West Texas is making his big investments in natural gas and wind, and a guy like him, he's done his homework, and so he.
Well, my understanding though is he's hoping to benefit to a certain degree to a lot of the government subsidies put in.
Right. Well,
the
yeah,
wind.
we do it, but I'll tell you, the solar industry is the one where there was a company in California that was a big solar cell manufacturer. The federal government loaned $500 million to, and they declared bankruptcy not too long after the loan. And so that's an example of a problem that we may run into trying to finance some of these questionable technologies.
Well, the left is always banging the drum on the green
Right.
energy, and then they say if we put our money into whatever wind energy, if we put it into solar energy, if we put it into, we'd be much better off. I don't know if I believe that, but
Right.
you know, that's their
and
their
actually,
statements.
when we look, oil they're right on oil. I mean, there's a future footprint that a future impact from oil. Wind, the birds, I think, are the only ones that there's a downside for birds apparently in the
Right.
wind energy, but actually natural gas. A company called Bloom Energy with some incredibly brilliant research scientists have come up with a fuel cell that runs on natural gas. And the way it works is apparently is you bring the natural gas into one side of the box, produces electricity inside the box that runs the building, and then water comes out the backside from the chemical operation. And so almost no environmental impact whatsoever.
But it depends upon natural gas, so I guess, of course, natural gas is something they don't have to pump it through pipelines. You could actually bring tankers with natural gas.
Well, no,
Is
you
that
can't.
right?
You know, you've got to bring it in through pipes. It's
You
too. It's not dense enough to unless you liquefy it.
Okay, so when you see it on the road, it says that's liquefied natural
Right,
gas. So those
that's
little
the
things,
only way to get it
don't
in
get
tanks.
close, you'll get blown
Yeah,
up,
yeah.
right?
The no, natural gas is probably the cleanest hydrocarbon we have out there. And all over Asia, they've converted most all their vehicles, public transport, taxis, and everything to it, to propane or some kind of alternative that's not as polluting as gasoline or diesel. And so,
Yeah. Well, so what do? They actually screw a tank. I think I'd read that our RTA or buses or something here was going to do that.
right.
So what do? They screw something like you grill your, a
It-
barbecue
that's
grill. It's
what
like
it
a
almost
tank like
looks
that,
like.
and then you screw that on there. And then,
basically, you open up the trunk of every taxi in Asia, and it has a little canister that looks very similar to that sitting in the back of it.
And then, but what about the explosive capabilities? Have they dealt with that?
You know, I'm undoubtedly there's some issues with that. I don't.
Big explosion when you have a traffic accident. Blows up
but I'll tell you, having traveled there over the last 2 decades, the difference in their environment is unbelievable. When in the 90s, I would become nauseous the first day I arrived.
Traveled where?
In Asia. And the pollution was so bad in the 90s, and now
it's much better now.
You can actually get there and breathe without becoming ill.
Well, you know, I always bring up the same example, but I remember growing up in one of these industrial towns up north when I was a kid, and man, the pollution was terrible.
Right.
And I don't know if that was addressed then or was much of an issue.
Yeah.
But of course now there's no industry, so it's cleaner.
No, well, and
no jobs either.
You know, we've got to take care of our environment because it's the only world we've got. So any move to, you know, and this Bloom Energy, they're actually looking at the technology. You'd have an air conditioner sized box essentially outside your house that the natural sort of eliminate the need for these power lines. A lot of the copper and different things that go into the transportation of the electricity.
This is an unfair question, but so I'm looking at this power line outside the building here because the window's open. This is our lighting sources.
Right.
Our lighting sources, see, we're ecologically friendly in this small studio where we use the solar energy. But at any rate, I'm looking outside the window and you see these terrible looking power lines. And in a lot of places, they just bury them.
Right.
I wonder if that's ever been discussed here in Corpus Christi.
I would imagine it's one of those cost factors that comes into play. But in the future, just be a buried gas line, and you wouldn't have all this eyesore of power lines running everywhere.
And you know, the other thing is obviously is stating, I don't know what the economic impact on this, or it's a fair question to even discuss. You know, in the hurricanes, if we would have these things buried, I don't know that necessarily we'd have to worry about being without power for 2 weeks.
That's you just hope in the future that we start doing the right thing, I guess, as far as that.
Well, the right thing is always, I guess, subject to conjecture.
The cost-benefit analysis, I think we look at something that's a little more costly and we go with the cheapest.
So what have you been doing going to Asia? Some sort of commie?
What
part of Asia are you going to?
No, I travel all over just, to conferences there, and also just trying to understand why all the wealth is flowing that direction. America's a very, our corporations and money and everything is going in that direction.
What about the conspiratorialists that believe that America has been sold out? We've been sold out to the Chinese, and that's why the wealth is heading in that direction.
Well, it's just business. When you if some at Shanghai, you travel 6 hours by airplane, almost any direction in Shanghai except out to the Pacific Ocean, and you've got nearly 2 billion people there. And so when you look at a market of 2 billion. Versus the U.S. with maybe 320 million people, there's just no comparison. If I'm going to build a product and take it to market, I'm going to do it in Asia now because they're the largest auto market on the globe. They're economically they're the largest economic group on the globe now, surpassing both U.S. and Europe. So that's why you see we look at the Dow right now, and why the Dow's been so resilient is our largest companies in the U.S. make most of their money overseas now, and so they've recognized that's the place to be.
Let's get back to the Dow and resiliency here in a second. But you said it was just business. Man, what is business? When I was again, I kind of believe in conspiracies, but I remember when I was a kid and Nixon came up with ping pong diplomacy. Remember that?
Right, yeah.
Okay. So and then there were these scandals through the years in the Clinton administration that they were paying us for some of our politicians to get most favored nation status.
Right.
And then there were the debates regarding whether or not they should have most nation favored status because there were all these human rights abuses in China. Right. Remember that?
Right.
Then the next thing I know, after ping pong diplomacy, and then most favored nation status, and then the scandals of the politicians through the years. The next thing I know, China owns the United States of America. I go, okay.
Actually, when I travel over there, one of the things that the investment bankers and the people say over there is that most of this wealth in China to develop China came from America. It was American wealth and
Right,
European wealth.
I believe that would be true.
And the difference is you know, really you can look at that two ways. What we've done actually is we have moved China substantially towards in human rights to where they're starting to behave relatively reasonably. You know, they've released that artist, his name's Ai, that was you know, had said some things about the government, and you know, I think at some point they're, you know, what the Chinese have done is they're like capitalist America in the 1900s. These are diehard capitalists in China, whereas the U.S. is more of a socialistic country. They don't have all the safety nets we have here and everything now, but as the people become more and more economically prosperous, they'll start demanding more and more rights, and I think you'll see that country will slowly transition into what, I don't know if it'll ever reach the point of a European or American country as far as respect for human rights, but I'll tell you the progress they've made is just substantial considering where they were in the 50s and 60s with the Cultural Revolution. So it's just a remarkable change.
I've never been able to quite understand, as you state, the culture. I never studied it. The Cultural Revolution, Mao Zedong, communism, purges, all this stuff. I never quite understood it. I don't know if that was. I guess they never went through a stage of any kind of. They went directly from some sort of village or tribal or pre-industrial environment to communism. Is that what they did?
Well, yeah, and it was just this belief in getting back to the root agrarian.
Right.
Civilization, and probably the worst example was in Cambodia under Pol Pot, who decided to kill anybody with an education and or that wore glasses and move everybody back to the farms.
Wore glasses. Well, I would have gotten killed pretty young.
Yeah, 3 million people were killed in that deal out of a population of about 15 million. So just a brutal form of communism, and now
it seems like the communists are real good at killing their own people.
Yeah,
I don't know what the deal on that
well,
is.
and the smart people. If you're an intellectual and have an opinion, they kill you. But the interesting thing,
but some very well educated people were, I thought, involved in communism in Russia. Is that right?
Well, Lenin was, I think,
yes.
and Marx, but I don't remember Stalin being overly educated. That's what.
Probably you know more about it than me.
But no, the interesting thing, I traveled to Cambodia, and you know they've got a lot of issues with corruption, as all those communist countries did, the previously communist countries. But Cambodia is, you know, embraced the really the Chinese model of capitalism, and yeah, they're all, you know, they've opened up, you know, and
some people claim China doesn't have true capitalism, though, that it's all somehow state run and it's
well,
state decided.
There's a lot of government support, and a lot of government direction in it, but I think when I think of the capitalism, I think of the entrepreneurial. The general feeling on the street that, hey, I need to get a business started, and I've got a chance now, an opportunity, and I think that's the most important thing. Just like this Eagle Ford Shale is hardworking people think I've got an opportunity to get ahead, and I can do something that'll make a difference. And there's a lot of entrepreneurial spirit, and everybody's wanting to start a business, and everybody's got some idea to export to America or, you know, do something constructive. You know, it's a feeling we don't have in America and Europe anymore that I think we've lost. The energy is a lot different there than it is here.
Why have we lost it here?
You become too prosperous, and there's not the same incentive.
People aren't as hungry.
Yeah, they'll start a business, and they won't mess with buying a house or an apartment or getting an apartment. They'll live on a futon in their business. And
I lived upstairs here.
That's
I lived upstairs right here in this building for 7 years.
That's entrepreneurial dedication right there. That's
the first 7 years I owned it.
Right.
At any rate, that was the plan.
It's amazing the number of businesses, internet cafes and stuff that just start up in those countries, and the people live right there. You know, when they shut down at night, they crawl on that futon and go to sleep. And and that's something that an American probably isn't willing to do.
You said something about the Dow being very resilient. So I know you're a professor of finance. Mm-hmm. You got any money in the market?
You know, we were talking about that yesterday at lunch, and myself and an economics professor, Dr. Crowley.
And I mean very generally, because obviously I don't want you to say your finances on the air or anything.
Yeah, we were talking about it, and I I have to say I've been very lucky in life.
Good for you.
As far as my investments go, yeah, I have run a pretty consistent strategy of betting against the dollar, and then investing in some pretty diversified global portfolio, and I stayed out of the tech sector in the late '90s. I avoided that, and I was looking back, and you know, you have your ups and downs, but everybody's talking about how bad the market's been, and I look back and go, wow, I think we've had a pretty good run. So
yeah, that's an exception to the rule, because a lot of us haven't done that well, myself included.
I've looked at. I think the short-term investor may have been hurt, but if you're in it for the long haul, and you'll stick with a strong allocation with some good fundamentals under it, it just seems like the common sense wins out over the long haul.
So let's say I don't want to be in the market right now, because I just don't want to dedicate my part of the life, my whatever free time I have, to studying it or researching it or following it, right? That's intelligible, right? But you can't get any. You get basically at almost 0% in CDs now, and bonds now, et cetera, right?
No, but that's another place that I've been relatively fortunate. Is I've bet against the dollar, and put some money into some of these international investments that pay, even though they're bonds that, you know, and stocks, the dividends may be relatively low, because the dollar drops relative to their currency, their value appreciates even more. You know, in it, and yeah, you're right now putting your money in a CD or money market. Almost not worth the time to fill out the paperwork.
It's a shame, but you have a lot of senior citizens that relied upon, and this is kind of a social issue, and again, some of these questions are, I know they're unfair to you, but you have a lot of senior citizens that aren't in the market, have never been in the market, but they have savings, and they're relying upon CD interest rates, et cetera, and now they're spending their capital to live.
Yeah, well, the Fed policy of, you know, there's just two old tools that we think should work every time, and they don't work anymore. And the one is manipulating interest rates and sending them to ridiculously low values.
Didn't Obama just make a promise to keep the 0% interest rates to the prime rate for 3 years because the market was crashing? He did that, and then the market did recoup for a couple days.
Right.
And then, but unfortunately, that was at the detriment at the small investor, wasn't it?
Less about the market, because the large stocks really don't represent the American economy. But the American economy, the theory is you lower interest rates, it makes it cheaper to buy a house, cheaper to buy a car, cheaper to make an investment in a small business. But the fact is, if people think that house is going to go down in value, or they may not have a job, they're not going to borrow the money anyway. And so we're in what we call the liquidity trap. The other idea is the Keynesian idea of priming the pump and just to stimulate the economy and kickstart us out of this. The problem is Keynesian analysis worked real well when our government was very small, and we did a large priming and it got us going. I'm afraid now our government has flooded the pump. We've got too much make work already at the government, and so the money's being used very inefficiently. So any stimulus package just vanishes into the ether.
So it only worked when a large percentage of people were involved in very productive work, et cetera, and then that small stimulus would help.
Right.
But when maybe through the years they've kept bigger and bigger stimuluses, we're to the point it can't do any good anymore.
America needs to get their focus back into the science, technology, engineering, building goods, creating innovation, doing research.
What about the arts? What about humanity? What about sociology, psychology? Those don't count?
Those all come with money and time.
You think so?
When I go to the art museum, the wealthy really enjoy the art and everything because they become wealthy through these other business endeavors. And so we've got to create a wealth in the economy. You know, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We have to eat. We need shelter, and then you work up, and that's where, so we've got to provide for the basics of our citizens, and especially these blue-collar workers, and these, you know, with 40 million people in poverty, you know, 10% official unemployment, 20% real unemployment. We've got to put people to work in productive jobs that allow them to compete with Asian workers, and this Eagleford Shale goes a long ways in that direction. Yeah, I wrote an article where I mentioned something about the British youth and Shakespeare, and you'd commented on that. I probably picked on Shakespeare unfairly. I probably should have picked.
I might have that article. Go ahead.
I should have picked on the monarchy. They study too much about their past and their monarchy, and they should have been giving these kids opportunities by a more entrepreneurial curriculum, in the sciences and technology and engineering and business.
Well, I think what happens though too is if you're part of it, right? If your father's a union person, and or you have some sort of privileged background for whatever reason, you don't realize the need for productivity because you're from you don't see the real world.
Right. Well, yeah, and that's I guess in talking about the arts and everything, I guess from a blue collar area, you're so worried about putting food on the table, you don't have much time to expand your horizon. My mom was an art major, and she had a greater capability to appreciate that, or opportunity to appreciate that. And so I think they both play a very good role. And I've noticed in the country, we pay some of the people that make the most money, are the people who do entertain us and make our lives better. From the singers and actors
individually,
yeah,
right?
and sports
and
stars,
popular
and all
popular
that.
arts,
Right,
whatever.
right.
They do very well. The popular artists.
But yeah, and we talk about taxes on the rich, and there are some taxes that I think would go a long ways towards forcing some of the wealth to be put to better use by taxing wealth in a way that says if you're not using it at its highest and best use and using it productively, you won't be able to afford to keep it. And so that's a type of tax. I mean, we've got to be real careful in taxing the wealthy, because we don't want to tax the productive entrepreneurial spirit that made the wealthy wealthy. We want to tax the
well, that's
the spirit that,
of course that's assuming. I think the largest percentage of wealth though is in inherited wealth. I don't think it's
about 80% of it is not
is that right?
Self-created. Yeah. But
well, what is wealth? At what point is one a wealthy person? By the way, what's the statistical? At 0% interest rates, you got to be very wealthy to be able to retire.
I think Goldman Sachs had a $250 million net worth to call a person wealthy, but I think that varies. but no, here's an example of utilization of resources less effectively. Someone builds a 10,000 square foot house.
Yes.
Okay. There's where we probably ought to have
some sort of consumption tax or something.
Actually, a progressive property tax on residential property. If your house is valued at $2 or $3 million, you probably ought to be paying 10 or 15% on that to discourage that. Because what would have been better is if that wealthy person, instead of building a 10,000 square foot house, that they'll only use 3,000 square foot of.
But you could do that on everything.
But the
right wing is against that. Yeah. 8-cylinder cars, you could use it on bigger yachts. You could use it.
Right.
You could use. And that's the purpose.
And that wealth tax, yeah. And that what it does is it encourages those entrepreneurs that have created a lot of wealth to continue to reinvest it back into jobs, growing businesses, buying equipment that would make their companies more efficient and more competitive. And so what we do is we have a consumption tax that discourages conspicuous consumption. You're free to do it, but we recognize that it's a value destroyer in the economy and not a value creator, and we start forcing. And so, but we've got to be real careful in taxing, certain types of income and corporate and raising taxes on corporations, because that money those taxes directly impact our competitiveness. And so we've got to be very careful when we go looking for money, that we don't do things that impacts our competitiveness and productivity. What we want to do is tax those things that detract from our competitiveness and productivity when we go after the wealthy.
And so you're saying, like, you're implying that, but I don't see that necessarily consumptive wealth. You're implying that certain parts of extreme consumption discourages productivity. Is that what you're saying?
Right. Yeah. Initially, there's some work created to build the house.
Right.
But once the house is built,
and then the energy to run the house, et cetera.
It's just a drain on it's a drain on our. Whereas if you'd have taken that same $2 million, bought more efficient equipment from a manufacturer that produced goods, that created a couple of more jobs, made us more competitive, that would have been a far better use of that $2 million than tying it up in some large house that just sits there. In essence, it's lost wealth. It's just wealth that's stuck there.
I saw in one of your columns you talked about seek diversification in investments, and obviously there's been this beck and call towards buy gold and buy silver because people have lost the faith in, I guess, arguably lost the faith in the markets and or the stability of America, and they see the economic doldrums, so they're afraid they're going to be out on the streets. They've lost faith in a way, I guess, in paper money too. What's fiat currency? You've heard all these arguments, right. From certain peoples. It's fiat currency, and since we got off the gold standard, and we no longer the dollars no longer say silver certificate on them, etc. So, what's the deal on gold and silver? They're pretty high.
Right.
Do you have any opinions, or what are your thoughts on gold and silver?
Here's my opinion. I sold most all the silver I owned at $34 an ounce, and I just sold all the gold I owned at $1,815 an ounce. And so I'm out of both of those commodities. I don't see those as long-term viable investments. I paid $7 an ounce for the silver, I believe, about 30 years ago. No, it hadn't been 30 years ago. In 1985, I believe, is when I bought that. So 26 years ago, I bought it at $7 and $490. The silver at $7 an ounce, and the gold.
So you bought a bunch all those years ago, and you didn't reinvest over the years at a high.
Not a bunch.
But I mean, you didn't reinvest through the years at 20, 30.
No, I didn't. And actually, that was the it took probably 15 years before the price ever returned to where I did. I don't like assets like that. The gold and the silver is more like the house. It just sits there and doesn't produce. The house you could rent out, but the gold and silver doesn't produce dividends. It's not a wealth creator. It's just an emergency store. What's creating this market are these large, especially in the Middle East and Asia. They have a real affinity for gold, and it's a secure metal in their mind to put currency to put money in when the dollar's dropping, and so they've created this market. I don't think it's a sustainable price. And only small countries really can use gold or silver to back their currency because the U.S. float in the dollar far exceeds the gold.
So if you got all the gold maybe in the world, it couldn't back up the dollars because there's too many dollars.
And to put it in perspective, all the gold in the world would fit in this building.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's just not that much gold in circulation. I've been to the largest reserve of gold in the world there at the Federal Reserve in New York.
And you saw the gold?
Yeah, saw the gold from over 100 countries have their gold in the Federal Reserve in New York.
That's interesting.
It's impressive to see, but it's surprisingly the room is relatively small. It's carved into the granite of the bedrock of Manhattan Island there, and at the New York Federal Reserve. More gold there than at Fort Knox. So
maybe somebody could short gold. There's probably an exchange traded fund that shorts gold or silver.
There is, and that's what I've told people. If you wanted to, I wouldn't recommend buying options or shorting things. I just sold what I had. Because for that. But I do think there's going to be some hedge funds and people like that make a significant. Will make a significant move in that direction here shortly.
What about somebody who's saying, hey, look, it's all manipulated anyway? You can't really believe it's a market price. There's somebody in a back room, whether it's the Hunt brothers in Dallas and whenever that was, the 80s, that's somehow they'll push it up and then they'll short it and it goes down. But these aren't true markets.
Well, I think they are. There are instances of that. As you notice, though, the invisible hand of the market tends to slap pretty hard those people that think that they're bigger than the market. The Hunts are a good example of that. When they tried to corner the silver market, they drove silver to nearly $40 an ounce. And needless to say, every marginally productive mine in the world started producing silver, and very shortly they were wiped out. And so they took that's what they always say. How do you make $1 billion? Start with 10 billion. That's kind of where the Hunt started, and both those brothers.
Are there any other examples of somebody who tried to corner the market and who were either successful or unsuccessful, whether it was in gold and silver or whatever? I remember these movies, and I think it must be fairly prominent because it's at least the theme in the movies, the Goldfinger movies or the international terrorists to control whatever.
I think that the most successful controls have been in the oil industry. The Rockefeller was the first, and then OPEC. The Arab countries have been successful in the 70s in different times of of creating cartels. that
My
control
understanding, the
market.
diamonds
De Beers has been
have been very
successful.
successful in
Right.
that a diamond really has very little intrinsic worth, and if all the diamonds in the world were released, they'd be worth nothing. Have you heard
Right.
those arguments?
Oh, yeah, no, I've heard that there's pretty much an unlimited supply of diamonds
Mhm.
for the market, but De Beers controls their release
Well, look at
creates a market.
I don't know if this is analogous, but I mean, even sugar water, Coca-Cola has done very well in turning gold,
Right,
from Coca-Cola,
right.
which is a marginal product.
Well,
at best.
the interesting thing about diamonds is diamonds can be made out of peanut butter.
Is that right?
So any carbon-based material, under high pressure. I think General Electric was the one that was making had a machine that they put some peanut butter in and made a diamond. So
Can one differentiate it used to be years ago you could differentiate a man-made diamond from a
I'm sure they can. I think that
yes.
the
Supposedly the sparkle and all this.
Yeah, I think the man-made diamonds are maybe have less flaws or something. I forget I was watching a deal on it, but on the Nova, I believe, had a special on that.
And you're seeking diversification in investments. Research into this phenomenon that is ingrained in most species. Herding animals seem to engage with the herd because of the safety the herd provides them on an individual basis. I assume that you're talking about generally people have a tendency to all invest
right
as a herd, whether it's in gold or silver or diamonds or whatever.
And I think this goes back to there's a lot of people in the behavioral finance area claiming that investors behave irrationally and consumers behave irrationally, and it's not clear to me it's irrational behavior. I think it's actually the rational behavior derived from years of evolution where we were surviving on the savannah. Herding was a safety mechanism that kept us safe. Today, the way the markets operate and the fact that we're not trying to avoid a saber-toothed tiger out on the savannah, the herding behavior actually tends to work against us, and we all herd into something when it's overpriced and herd out when it's when it's falling too much. And so, but in some economies, it's definitely paid to follow the herd. In Taiwan, when their market crashed by about 80%, it would have paid to follow the herd and get out. And in Japan, similarly. I've
seen that before too. I don't remember was the last time gold was run up. The average citizen went out and sold a lot of their gold, and then it crashed.
Yeah.
I mean, I recall that. Sometimes it seems to work.
Yeah, I would say herding is not an irrational behavior. But what you've got to do is sit back and judge: is this the time to be herding, or is this the time to be going against the crowd? And I'm going to tell you, when I see everybody running for the doors in a building, I'm going to get with them and run for the doors. In some of the markets, when I see everybody running out, I may sit back and wait. Or I may be buying as they're selling. So I think you've got to exercise some judgment.
Well, I think probably most of the people who are watching this show maybe the only investment they have is their real investment, where they have a lot of equity, is in their home. Mm-hmm. How have prices in the home markets kept up in Corpus Christi?
I just was doing some research on that from September 10th, 2001 to September 10th, 2011. Home prices have been back to flat.
Well, what were they before September?
Well, we had the real large bubble in the. Everybody got caught in a bubble where prices had run up substantially.
So even in the Corpus Christi market, prices had run up and they had gone down for a while. I wasn't.
In the Atlanta Federal Reserve predicted, and this is a generalization. It doesn't apply to specific markets, but that by 2050 prices will actually return to about 1996 values because of demographics. We'll have a lot of older people, a lot of younger people, but very few people in that family formation demographic that buy these larger homes. So that'll force the median price down. And so the home is a place to live. It's a consumer item. Don't think of it as an investment. An investment is investing in the technology and the growth of the economy around the world.
Well, I know some of the economists say, well, look, a home isn't, or these finance guys say, well, a home isn't an investment because at the end of your life, you're carried out of that home on a stretcher.
Yeah.
There's no equity, or you'll never get any equity.
Well, and it's not an investment because the returns historically have been very low on houses.
Well,
There's
but,
a lot
but,
of
but within
expenses
our
to
lifetimes,
maintain them.
but within our lifetimes, there was this
Yeah,
long from the '60s to whenever it was, the '90s or whatever. There was a gradual
Right,
increase.
and here's the surest way to tell that the houses are getting overpriced. Look at the ratio of income to house price, and that'll tell you when that deviation is significant. Then it gets out of the affordability range, and inevitably we're going to have a collapse in those prices. They really need to track each other very closely. If incomes are flat, house prices should be flat, and that's just going to be.
So how big was the decrease in the housing market in Corpus Christi? Do you think was it? Do you know statistics?
I haven't seen the exact statistics on it. My general feeling's around 5%.
Yeah, that wasn't very big. It didn't seem like here.
Corpus is fairly resilient because of our large number of state and federal employees, and with the Naval Air Station and then a lot of the hospitals and stuff. So we're fairly resilient. The refinery jobs are fairly stable. And then I think with this Eagleford, we may get some traction again in our
so
markets.
our houses might go up in value.
Right.
Time to sell.
Corpus may be an exception. We may go against the national trend in house prices.
Well,
So-
the house. I mean, just speaking obviously, I guess you don't look at it as investment because some people really like a nice house. They get a lot of enjoyment out of their homes. At least they say they do.
Right. And that's exactly what they should do. They should.
I
think
don't
of
see
as
it
an
myself
investment.
because I think a lot of people
It's
that
a
own
hassle.
houses. They're a lot of work, right?
Yeah, it's a house is a hassle. Yeah.
Well, look at the one thing in Corpus Christi that I found is that residential didn't go down very far, but commercial property took a tremendous hit, didn't it?
Because it's a house is a personal item to a large degree, and so you see decisions being made for school districts, neighborhoods, whereas a commercial property is strictly based on the cash flows that it's just going to generate. We buy the commercial property with the just directly on the analysis of the cash flows and the return on investment. Whereas we buy a house, it should be a personal decision.
The only thing is these commercial properties, once they're abandoned, they're on all the major arteries, and if they're not kept up or whatever, it really trashes out the city.
Well, and that's where I'm talking about with this with potentially a tax incentive or some kind of a structure that discourages abandonment of property, and then another one is farming in the middle of town, discourage of farming, to force that property to be put to some use. And make it unaffordable to leave it in that
So
situation.
increase taxes for abandoned properties
you try to think of some strategy to force landowners to use property at its highest and best use to maximize its utilization. And sometimes it is. I mean, maybe I may be wrong about this. It may be better that we let that property sit there until
I don't know.
a better use comes along.
I kind of agree with your earlier statement. I think that people that are not using their land in a financially responsible way, it's just it looks bad. It's bad for the city, and it causes a lot of urban decay. But that's my opinion. I wanted to thank you for coming on, Dr. Swint Friday, professor, Texas A&M Corpus Christi. Good night.
As I passed by a real fine hotel, a chick walked out. She sure looked swell. I gave the eye and started to carry on. When a Cadillac cruised up and swish, she was gone. It should have been me with that real fine chick. It should have been me with that real fine chick. Hey, 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 driving that Cadillac. A little later on, a theater I passed, I spotted another chick, and did she have class? I was all set to write her name in my book when her husband came up and gave me a real dirty look. It should have been me with that real fine chick. It should have been me with that real fine chick. It should have been me to have been her chaperone. When I got to the corner, I saw a sharp cat with a $300 suit on and a $100 hat. He was standing on the sidewalk by a diner floor when a voice within said, "Come on, Daddy, let's go." It should have been me with that real fine should have been me.